Yeah, I mean, I believe that ceremonial cacao in 15, 20 years is going to be as big as yoga and Starbucks, in each of those realms, so to speak. So there is a limiting factor in the world of ceremonial cacao because it needs to be grown at small family farms and produced on a human scale. So the price for the real stuff might go up in the future, but in terms of the potential positive impact in the world of ceremonial cacao, I think we're only just scraping the surface.
Welcome to the Worth the Fight podcast, where we bring you powerful conversations surrounding the sensible and therapeutic use of psychedelics and plant medicines towards healing trauma. I'll introduce you to guests who, through their own personal journey and transformation, tell the Worth the Fight story. I'm your host, Matt Simpson, author of Worth the Fight, Acting for a Better World, a guide to spirituality, psychedelic medicines, and overcoming trauma. Thank you for listening.
Hello. Great to be back after a little bit of a lull here. January and February, just moved from Los Angeles back home to the Midwest, Chicago and Milwaukee. And I think with this episode, we're going to get back on track. I got a nice queue of inspired guests that I am so excited to interview and to share with y'all. And feeling really good about the first 20 episodes of the Worth the Fight podcast. And I'm so grateful for the support and encouragement along the way. My next guest is Nick Meador, a wonderful man I befriended years back. Nick has the most incredible raw organic cacao. He sources from small farms in Guatemala. It's direct trade. He knows the farmers. There's something different about his cacao versus the stuff you can get at Whole Foods. And it's a great honor to share his work and to share, how cacao has, I believe that this special plant medicine is going to have a very important role in the psychedelic renaissance as, it complements nicely. We're going to get into that in our interview, but it very much complements a lot of the healing and the growth. It's just a wonderful plant medicine that I revere so deeply. Nick has been generous to provide a 20% off discount code at his store. SoulLiftCacao.com is the website, and the discount code is WORTHTHEFIGHT, all one word, all uppercase. So please check out his products. And this cacao drink has been an instrumental part of my work, and it's purported to have anandamide, which is known as the bliss molecule, I believe, and is said to promote lateral thinking. So you get a little bit more of these outside the box insights, and so I revere this plant medicine as a special creative tool. And can't wait to share this conversation with my friend Nick, who's doing, again, incredible work. And he's just got loads of wisdom to impart as well. And hope y'all enjoy this episode. If you do enjoy this episode, please consider leaving a review. You can go to ratethispodcast.com/worththefight to see how. We certainly love your support. The reviews help us garner favor with the Apple and iTunes search algorithms to get these conversations out to more people. And we appreciate your support. Without further ado, my conversation with Nick. Thanks so much for listening.
Nick, how have plant medicines informed your path?
Hey, Matthew. Yeah, I've been on a journey of healing and self-development for about a decade now, after beginning a practice of meditation that led to more of a yoga practice, really. But cacao specifically came into the picture for me in 2015. I had been hearing about it for a few months, and it sounded kind of silly to me, actually, when I first heard about it, the idea that chocolate could be spiritual in some way. But I just sort of sucked up my pride and gave it a try. I was at a regional Burning Man event, and somebody offered a cacao ceremony. So it involved some meditative practices, some intimacy, like interactive practices with other people. But I just felt like I was more in touch with my body, more in touch with my life force and spirit, and also had this focus and clear energy, not a jittery kind of energy that can come from coffee, for example. So I really understood through that direct experience what people mean then with the term plant medicine. Because to me, that means a plant that almost has an intelligence of its own, a plant that isn't going to necessarily fix our problems, but can be like an ally. That's another term that I've heard and that I use.
I like that one.
Sorry?
I said I like the ally.
Yeah. Because I think of it like almost like this energy of a hand on our back that can support us while we take more responsibility for our own holistic well-being, because ultimately we're the ones in the driver's seat. And just like a human facilitator or healer, they're not going to fix our problems. The most they can do is really be with us as a guide and an ally while we heal ourselves.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you for that. We'd met, boy, was it the summer of 2016 at that event in Dream Awake, I think it was the name of it, in Michigan. And that was really a special weekend. That was the first, I think I'd had a cacao ceremony before, but your ceremony was next level, man. Bringing in movement along with the movement and breath along with the cacao was really profound. And I think I had a double dose that day. And, because I'd started, I was introduced to cacao when I was at yoga training in Guatemala at Lake Atitlan. And, so I was thinking, I know cacao and I got this, and having a double dose was a pretty profound experience. So what has been the motivation to start this company? I write in Worth the Fight that after all the traveling around the globe and all the different psychedelics that I've done, that raw organic cacao sourced from you is my favorite medicine on earth. And I don't think I put that in the book, the source from you, but I'm going to put a link on, I was just thinking about this the other day, on my website as for people to find you. And I've just really, really enjoyed this. And I credit this medicine or plant medicine or plant spirit, or the impression that it gives off for being a really profound ally in helping me write my book. And, finding flow, cacao, and puts me into a flow state. And, the flow research is showing that in a flow state, we're far more creative, we're far more productive, we learn at a higher clip. Yeah. So first I was going to say, I'm creating a discount code for your listeners just so we can not forget about that. It's going to be, Worth the Fight, all one word, uppercase letters. That'll get people 20% off. Wonderful.
A purchase from Soul Lift Cacao. So when you link them to the website, they'll get a little bonus that way. And my mission with Soul Lift Cacao has been to share the cacao that helped me in my own healing journey, because I was dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome, actually, and other things. Especially through my 20s, I was dealing with chronic depression, but that would come in on and off in my early 30s as well. And then chronic fatigue went on for about 5 years. It was like severe exhaustion, brain fog, like just trouble concentrating and focusing, and muscle pain. So when I experienced that cacao ceremony in 2015, I felt, there's a high amount of magnesium in real pure cacao that probably resulted in a little bit of a relief of that tension, the muscle tension. Magnesium is known to relieve muscle tension in that way. And then there's the increase of blood flow and iron in cacao. So both of those combined will result in more oxygen getting carried throughout the body. So it's literally like the body is more alive and rejuvenated. And so when I started, basically my first trip to Central America was early 2016, and I brought cacao back with me on the plane that time and started sharing it with friends. But it was really early 2018, after I moved to California, that I launched the legal food business. So actually set up in a commercial kitchen and inspected by the state of California, because I knew that that would be the way to get this medicine out to more people, because now I can legally ship it around the country and even around the world. And the sources in Guatemala just can't send small amounts to people very easily. They can send large amounts, but this way it's just, it's more convenient for people who only want 1 pound or a few pounds. Then
otherwise wouldn't be available.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for doing that, for doing this work and sharing the gifts and sharing your story, overcoming chronic fatigue. And when you were struggling, where, I know you as a free spirit traveler, what were you in that? Were you in the corporate world, or what was your jam or before?
Technically I was in the nonprofit world. I was a website manager, like social media and web content. So I got kind of sucked into the social media boom of the late 2000s. I felt really enamored with the possibility of social media and new journalism to change our society. So I actually have a master's in journalism. I was working as a website manager for an NPR station in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And even though it's like I had arrived at that place where I thought, wow, this is exactly what I wanted to do, I just still felt miserable and I couldn't figure out why. And eventually I realized that the daily news world was wearing on me. It was just so much weight and all this negativity that happens in the daily news world. And
we could do a whole episode on that.
Yeah. I was just aching for something more. I was aching for more connection, more community. I didn't know it, but I was aching for a spiritual practice, really. So that was like 2009, 2010. And then that's when I started reading about Jungian psychology and the collective unconscious and archetypes and all these kind of things that led me to, the internet. At that point, what the internet was really doing was starting to connect people based on these kind of curiosities about spirituality. And so this slogan, "Find the Others," came to me. There was a website called Evolver, the Evolver social movement, and they had a magazine called Reality Sandwich. So I started writing articles for them and, even like analyzing movies and the psychological perspective on movies that were coming out. And through that, it's so interesting to think about that now, because I only was able to get into a meditation practice because I found people on the internet who sent me guides on just like basic ways of connecting with my breath. And because at that time, I felt kind of intimidated by meditation for some reason. I felt like it wasn't something that I could do on my own, or it seemed inaccessible. So the internet, it's all happening so fast. The way that the internet is changing our world, it connects us, it connects us with other people around the globe, but also ideas. And it's just this really, really fast-paced exchange of information. And it'll be really interesting to see how that I think it's just going to keep accelerating, really.
They're exponential technologies, the accelerated technologies. When we had Stephen Kotler on the show a few episodes back, he paints an optimistic picture. But it's buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride, and these technologies that are driving a rapidly changing world are doubling. They're doubling every year, every 18 months. And, we've learned more about the human brain in the last 10 years than we have in the previous 2000. And that technology that underlies that science, that's doubling too. And so in a lot of respects, I think with this, we're in the process of a massive rebranding what spirituality is and what these plant medicines are, and really what we are as human beings, because we're evolving together. We're evolving with the plant medicines. We're evolving with these accelerated technologies. These little computers in our pocket, they're changing us.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I know there can be some fears about that too, and that's legitimate. You know, how to stay healthy, like holistic health, really, as these technologies come in. But there's just, yeah, I think it's easy also then to overlook the benefits that we're experiencing from this kind of interconnectedness. And for me, just to finish that loop of my story, when I was working for the NPR station, that's when I first got really sick. And I think I actually had just left that job in order to try writing a book. And then I got sick, but I was still very much in that turmoil of like the daily news cycle. And so that illness, the mysterious illness that nobody could explain to me, no doctors or anything, led me to really find answers about what was going on. And that's what eventually led me to working with plant medicines and cacao, as well as training in all different kinds of healing and self-development modalities. Because through that, you know, I discovered that I had some passion and skill as a facilitator and as a coach. And that's not anything coming from in my 20s, being afraid of even like class discussions, group discussions, and definitely afraid of public speaking. Then it's so funny to think that through that illness and through that search for healing, I found a whole new side of myself and just a whole new direction in life. So even though it was very, very difficult to go through that illness, ultimately I ended up in a much better place in life.
Wow. Beautiful share. And I've been, on our last call, we talked about, I feel like, we've kind of been on parallel journeys and since meeting you and I've been so, enamored and impressed with your work and impressed with your space holding and impressed with another thing that we talked about is that the male vulnerability of just, raising your hand and saying, hey, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm feeling. And that is such a gift for our human family because that sends these subtle invitations, subtle call outs to everyone else to examine themselves in a similar manner. And I feel like, in addition to the rapidly changing world that we talked about a moment ago and redefining spirituality and I think that this male vulnerability movement is a very profound movement that is happening, and it coincides with everything that we've talked to this point, and the idea of connection comes to mind, and if we live in this interconnected world where we are globally connected through the internet and the importance of maintaining this authentic person-to-person connection, which is potentially with these forces that we're talking about, these exponential forces, is threatened to a degree as well. So the importance of still being very human and sharing how we feel and opening up to our loved ones and making sure that we're taking care of our tribe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This whole question about male like vulnerability and emotionality it's complex, because actually it's funny. I don't watch a lot of TV, but I was recently, my partner got me into this show. I'm not going to name it, but it was a show like a TV show about dating basically. And I was surprised to see a lot of male vulnerability in that show, like men crying in the show. And I thought it was really beautiful, actually, in that context of relationships and dating, to show the deep feelings that can come up in men, particularly especially because of past experiences. We all experience disappointments and pain and trials and tribulations as humans. I feel curious about how this is going to evolve more, because on the subject of vulnerability, I think there are nuances to it. And especially if we're doing deep shadow work and really going through the potential muck and grime that's way, way down in our memories or past experiences, some of that can require a really strong private confidential container to most effectively dig through and process. At least that's my belief. So that's the area that I want to bring more attention to in that discussion is, just getting clear on what is best to work through in a private container, potentially in like a men's group or with a private therapist or in a plant medicine ceremony, versus what are the good ways to really take it totally public and, maybe cry on on camera, even on social media.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's an ultra important conversation. So thank you for giving your attention to that. And
Sure.
yeah, it's ultra nuanced, and that, I mean, this is going to be the central point of my next book. I feel I have a slow hunch, and because this is what is so fascinating and to me, and really is a big passion. What is your case for cacao as the superfood of superfoods?
Yeah. So there's, it's funny on the question of research. I think there's more research and potentially testing to do with cacao, these ones that are getting called ceremonial cacao. But as far as I know from my research and talking with experts, cacao might have the highest amount of antioxidants of any food. Actually, the flavonoids are the name of the ones with the highest content. And then there are the minerals like iron and magnesium, like I mentioned. And then the main active compound is theobromine. So that is a mild stimulant. It works mostly on the cardiovascular system. So it's not a general nervous system stimulant the way that caffeine is. It's not as jittery. There's not really the crash or cravings. So working with cacao, there's not as much of a danger as with some plants, or I mean, with coffee. Coffee is one of the most addictive substances on the planet, really. There's not necessarily very much of a danger of working with coffee. But with cacao, it's not habit forming. In fact, to me, my opinion is that there's a little bit of a reverse tolerance with cacao, where the longer that I work with it, the less I necessarily need to feel connected with the benefits of it. And sometimes it's like cacao tells me to take a break. I mean, I say tell me, but it's not like I hear a voice. It's more just like I'm listening to what my body is saying, the sensations that are coming up. So there have been a couple times where I've taken like a month off of cacao, and I wondered, wow, am I just done with that? But then it would come back around, at least so far. So especially with plant medicine work, I think it's important to listen to the body and to the intuition, even dreams potentially. But then, yeah, there are those kind of two areas. When I introduce cacao to people, I actually talk about those things separately. The superfood benefits, like I was saying about antioxidants and minerals, and then the plant medicine benefits, the more energetic or spiritual so-called benefits. But on this question of like, is it the ultimate superfood? I don't know. With my own experience of diets and nutrition, I think that realm, that whole topic can, it's like, it can be so based on belief, and it can get almost religious sometimes. It's like the different trendy diets can be like religious movements, and people get so defensive about those things. Whereas I believe that different things work for different people at different times, and cacao's not necessarily for everybody. If somebody doesn't feel connected with it, or if it just doesn't, if it doesn't feel good, or if it upsets their digestion, then I just suggest they honor that and listen to that.
Beautiful. I love that. You're screaming anti-dogma,
Exactly.
And that's so important, as that is a welcoming principle for people that are on the sidelines that are curious
Yeah.
So let's. Can you take us into a plant medicine, a cacao ceremony? And really what's happening, and what you've seen, what you've experienced, potentially success stories of people overcoming,
Sure. Yeah. So first, this term cacao ceremony, as far as I can tell, is actually kind of a modern invention. The term itself, really, because it just seems that in the indigenous cultures, cacao has been used, going back like 3,000 years. They've found evidence, vessels with drawings of cacao on them, and even remnants of the plant cacao that get carbon dated back at least 3,000 years. However, what's less clear is exactly how it was used. It seems like there was a sense in these cultures of a spirit in cacao, that they revered it that way, and probably used in religious ceremonies, especially by the elites, like in the Aztec cultures. but there's not a lineage exactly of facilitating experiences centered solely on cacao as an agent of transformation, the way that there is a lineage for working with plants like ayahuasca or peyote. So as far as cacao's presence in ceremonies today in like Mayan indigenous cultures, it seems to be more on the sidelines, and they'll have ceremonies focused on fire or water, honoring those things. And cacao may be there more in the sense of like a harvest celebration. But cacao, this whole term food of the gods, for instance, that's Theobroma is the Latin form of food of the gods, but that name was put on cacao by a European who visited what is now called Central America. It's like it's just really important to look at all the layers of how these names and the meanings have been applied to a plant that is actually very mysterious in the historical sense. But today, I guess all that is not to say that a cacao ceremony is like a fake thing or unimportant. In fact, I believe it's just an evolving thing, something that's kind of evolving and it's like rebirth. It's like a rebirthing. Cacao is coming into modern culture in this modern context in a new way, and people are blending different kinds of healing and self-development practices together. And it's really important, I think, to think about what are the most effective ways that we can help people with cacao and different kinds of healing practices, given the world that we're living in today, where it's like conceptually our language and our ways of thinking about things are unique to the present time. So whatever may have helped people 3,000 years ago isn't necessarily going to help people today in 2020.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I love that perspective of, we are in, like we've been talking about, we're kind of in uncharted waters as a people right now. And we have these incredible gifts and tools, these plant medicines that are really going mainstream or have gone mainstream. Yeah. And, you got celebrities that are talking about ayahuasca. We got, MDMA. It's not a plant medicine, but it's a, psychedelic MDMA assisted psychotherapy in phase 3 clinical trials with our federal government. Medical marijuana in 38 states, legal. And times are changing. We got a lot of people that are struggling, a lot of people that are hurting, and we have these gifts. And I like the idea of meeting the times where the times are. And this is what we have, and these are the tools that we have. And I just like to applaud your courage for leading a path that hasn't been walked before. I know that that's not easy, and pushing out into the unknown, and sharing your gifts in the name of love. This cacao brings on the most beautiful, heart-centered feeling of love that one can experience, or at least that's been my experience. And the notion, we talked about this a little bit on the pre-call of these, and I think about this because I wrote a book about psychedelics, and I've had all of these profound ayahuasca experiences, and but I'm a few years removed, and the I look at cacao and fasting and this biohack culture that's been created, and microdosing psychedelics, all of these different things. Meditation, of course, has always been there, and it always will be there. And it is the secret sauce. I always say that, you could bypass all of this whole journey and just get a really strong meditation practice, and you'd be fine. And the flow science that is, again, screaming from all four corners that productivity, learning, and creativity are elevated when we're in a flow state. I think that all of those notions are here almost so we don't put the cart before the horse. These peak psychedelic experiences, that cacao is a little bit more gentle. So it's meeting our times where the times are at. Ayahuasca is a profoundly disruptive medicine. And that's been my experience. It disrupted addictive tendencies and depression and so on. So that's, I think that cacao can be bundled up in that class of another another tool, another avenue, another medicine, another strategy to live a healthy, happy, and strong life for ourselves, our loved ones, and our circles of influence.
Yeah. And to give people a sense of what they might expect with a cacao ceremony, I actually like to start with talking about what a ceremony even is, which to me is a ritual or a group experience where people have a chance to connect more with their bodies and with spirit or the universe or whatever term they might use to talk about something bigger than themselves. And so typically, there will be an opening circle where, at least for me, it's important to give people a chance to introduce themselves. And I find that just really solidifies the container, so to speak, and helps people become more present. Some people, especially if they haven't worked with cacao before, they might be feeling nervous or just feeling stressed about whatever was going on in their lives before they arrived. And my usual way of thinking about a cacao ceremony is to, after the opening circle, I'll give people the cup of cacao. It's made as a drink, basically like a very rich drinking chocolate. And then I'll lead a little meditation as they are feeling into their breath and starting to drink the cacao. And then I'll take them into a little bit of an embodied journey. I like working with practices like breathwork or some shaking type meditations or other gentle movements, feeling into all their sensations that they otherwise might take for granted. So that is related to meditation, and seated meditation can be powerful with cacao. It's just that I find that variety seems to work best for a cacao journey. So having some time sitting, and that can involve some discomfort potentially if they have some feelings coming up. But to have that chance to be present and to witness that, and then maybe go into some movements which can feel like releasing some of whatever they were sitting with. And then after having that embodied experience, then I like to give people some interactive experience as well, something more verbal where they can talk with people, maybe talking about a situation that has been weighing on them that they feel a little bit stuck with, because that combination of getting the support from other people and feeling the energy of cacao tends to bring people some insights, some new motivation to face a fear or to find a new constructive or productive solution to that thing that was weighing on them. And then at the end, I like to bring people back together for a closing circle where they can then have an opportunity to share with the whole group any insights or challenges that came up through the journey.
Beautiful. Thank you for breaking that down for our listeners here for context. And I think that these cacao ceremonies are going to be, would you think that they're not going anywhere, and being more prevalent, more opportunities for people to engage? Are you seeing that? Are you seeing people do parallel work alongside of you? I know that you've kind of taken a pioneer role in this, and I'm curious as to whether you're seeing that in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that ceremonial cacao in 15, 20 years is going to be as big as yoga and Starbucks, in each of those realms, so to speak. So there is a limiting factor in the world of ceremonial cacao because it needs to be grown at small family farms and produced on a human scale. So the price for the real stuff might go up in the future, but in terms of the potential positive impact on the world of ceremonial cacao, I think we're only just scraping the surface, really. And I think that cacao is going to find its way into a lot of different kinds of contexts. So it's not just going to be a circle that is like a replica of an ayahuasca model ceremony, which is kind of how it started with cacao ceremonies. I think there's a lot of potential for one-on-one work. Anyone who's doing Reiki or massage therapy or craniosacral work, cacao can just fit into these kind of existing contexts really easily. So it's a matter of getting groups together, having conversations about the best way to hold space for an experience with cacao, really understanding the energetics of it, the nutrition, and what it does with the mind, body, and spirit. So that's kind of the motivation for this for instance, this 10-week course that I'm going to be running pretty soon. It starts March 16th. And yeah, that'll be a group call each week going through different topics about the philosophy of facilitation and the self-development path of a leader and public speaker. And then talking a lot in depth about how to really bring cacao into a modern context and have the most positive impact in the world that we are living in today.
Beautiful. I'll be sure to put a link in the show notes so people can find the information, more information about that training. And thank you for sharing your gifts and for walking this path with integrity and showing how it's done.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, I guess the other thing I want to say about the ceremony experience and working with cacao is that because it's so gentle and we stay in touch with our ordinary consciousness, integration can be easier as well. And by that, I mean working some insight or new belief or new communication pattern back into our day-to-day experience. And this can seem simple, just naming that, but I think it really has huge implications because all plant medicines have a potential to help people and create healing experiences. But the stronger they are, the more sense of responsibility comes with the facilitation aspect. And so it'll be interesting to see how things evolve with the research in those areas. But in the meantime, people can host cacao experiences with less training, really. It helps to have any kind of training in Reiki or yoga teaching or things like this. But as long as people have a basic understanding of space holding and just the responsibility of a facilitator, then knowing how to make a drink and knowing how to share the information with people in a way that makes sense to anyone, really, then it's amazing how even those ingredients can create a profoundly healing experience for people. Like a few years ago, I was hosting a weekly cacao meditation, and I saw some of the people who were coming to that making profound changes in their life, just from something that from the outside perspective might seem very simple, drinking cacao and meditating in a group and having that intention circle at the beginning and sharing circle at the end.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that probably doesn't get enough attention. The idea of peak psychedelic or peak plant medicine experiences and how gosh darn challenging the integration can be in our world that is deprived of information, proper space holders in terms of, we talked about on the pre-call, the notion that there's not enough therapists that are ready for this surge that it is happening right now. And the idea that there's something that's more gentle, that is psychoactive, but not in a psychedelic manner. I think that there's, what does it have? The neurotransmitter anandamide. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is one of those things that I've heard different things from different people, like cacao experts, cacao farmers. Everyone says different things about what the actual contents are, but that seems pretty clear that cacao contains anandamide, which is known as the bliss molecule. Cacao also promotes the release of what you might call the happy neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin, as far as I know.
Yeah, that is very aligned with my experience. The idea that anandamide is purported to enhance outside the box thinking. So you get thus the creativity that is something that I've, leaned on this plant medicine, while writing my book, and I still do. And it's such a special, reliable information technology in a lot of respects, and I'm getting a little scientific there, but you can take that look at it and I hold it with reverence and intention. The value of, and I limit my chocolate consumption is something, because I think that it's just the intentionality, I think was a really important notion that these cacao ceremonies and that shamanic ceremonies have instilled in me to look at. And I do the same thing with coffee. I feel like I'm working with coffee as well. And that might be why I talk so gosh darn fast. But it's a powerful, reliable medicine that And of course, there's the other end of the spectrum where you can get into a little bit of trouble and where you need to pull in the reins and take, like you said earlier, and I didn't applaud that, but the idea of taking a month off and reevaluating, I think that's so important to do that. And then we come back, absence makes the heart often grow fonder. And, so coming back with a new appreciation, a new perspective. So cacao is not a psychedelic medicine. Have you had any healing with psychedelic plant medicines?
Yeah. I hesitate to go into that because of the legality piece essentially, but I can say that I've experienced, I gotta be totally honest though, I've experienced the whole spectrum with plant medicines. I've experienced very profound healing. And, at one time I did have an addiction to cannabis, which I didn't identify as that being the case, but looking back, that definitely was causing more problems than it was helping with a couple times in my life. So then from there, working with a more shamanic plant medicine actually helped kick the cannabis addiction. Yeah, that was one of the most profound. Also, just tuning more into my life purpose and mission came from working with plant medicines.
That's a powerful statement. So you said you were addicted to cannabis.
Yeah.
And you had a peak plant medicine experience, shamanic, and you were just done with the addiction?
Yeah, it was like, it wasn't even a mental decision. It was just like, it was gone from my nervous system. The compulsion to have the ritual that I used to crave, because with cannabis, because there was the feeling that cannabis would give me, but then there was also some kind of comfort from the ritual of actually smoking. So all of that desire was just gone. And cannabis is one of those things, like all of these things, it's so personal. Some people can work with it and it's supportive of them, apparently. For me, I always thought I was in control of it, but it would eventually lead me to a downward spiral where it was increasing these mood fluctuations, which in a psychological setting ended up getting called mood disorder or depression, not bipolar exactly, but just like a hopelessness and a despair. And like things were never really getting better. So, at one time cannabis did help with the muscle pain I was experiencing with the chronic fatigue situation. But these things can change, and something that's helping us at one time might end up just not helping us later on.
Yeah, beautiful. I appreciate your candor with that, and what comes to mind is the notion of the difference between a medicine and a poison is the dose, and surely cannabis is again, I think it's 38 states it's legal in medical marijuana terms, and I think that provides an incredible alternative to the opioid crisis. And so it's a big step up from that, but there still is that opportunity for addiction with cannabis. And thankfully, I think that we're shifting into a time, or at least this is what I tell myself, or this is what I experience in my little bubble, of full spectrum medicine. Hey, we have all of these different tools, all of these different plant medicines, all of these different modalities, meditation, fasting, biohacks, psychedelic peak experiences, psychedelic microdosing experiences. We have all these this big buffet that we can choose from. And the science is so profound. And do what works for you, and do you. And be you. I think that notion is really alive right now, and I'm thrilled to see that, as that is really the expression of that kind of that anti-dogma principle that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, exciting times.
Indeed. What comes to mind, Penny, for your thoughts when we talk plant medicines and the climate crisis? This is something I've been giving a little thought to.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is cacao farming. One of the sources that I worked with actually took over an old coffee plantation and where there was corn growing too, which means that they were cutting down cloud forest. That's not quite rainforest, but it's still very like biodiverse naturally, and very, very thick forest. A lot of like plants with thick waxy leaves, that kind of place. So these people took over an abandoned coffee plantation and have been transforming it into a permaculture farm focused cacao. And so cacao, like a true cacao farm, is not what we think of as farming. In the US, we're familiar mostly with monoculture, where it'll be like a huge expansive field with only corn or only soybeans or that kind of thing. Whereas the healthiest type of cacao farm is just going to look like a forest. That's agroforestry. That's what that means. So it requires diversity in order to be a healthy, functioning cacao farm, diversity of different plants. So at this particular one, for instance, they would grow cardamom, the spice, and they would move the cardamom around depending on what stage of growth the cacao trees were at, because the cardamom had a certain way of revitalizing the soil and securing more nutrients in the soil. So it's that kind of like symbiotic relationship and biodiversity that is required to create this sort of true ceremonial cacao. So when we think about, when I think about ceremonial cacao, I think about it creating benefits at every stage. Like with the farmers who grow it are getting paid more. One of the groups I work with, I just found out that the farmers are making more than 2 times the global average per pound when they sell their cacao beans. So the farmers are getting paid more. The people who are roasting and preparing the cacao are in safer working conditions. There's no child labor the way that there still, unfortunately, sometimes is in West Africa.
Yeah,
and then in West
Nestle
Africa, we've got to think about pollution too. The pollution and destruction of the earth. So getting back to your question about climate change, it's like if a farm is incorporating permaculture practices, or like the first farm I was talking about is actually operating off the grid. That's not the case for every cacao farm, but it's great that they're doing that. They're generating power from a hydroelectric spring water pool on their property. But then even just a small family farm is going to be using less power, creating less destruction, and creating less pollution, if any, because an organic cacao farm is going to have certain standards that it's necessary to take care of the earth and to be thinking about our symbiotic relationship with the earth, or a relationship that really needs to be more symbiotic for us to turn this global situation around.
Beautiful. So you said that the cacao trees need the diversity to thrive. Is that correct?
Yeah. Maybe we can post a picture on your website. On my website, I have a self-directed video training course that includes a virtual tour of the cacao farm that I visited in Guatemala. And seeing that is really eye-opening, I think, because, when you look at a cacao farm, it just looks like a forest with all different kinds of plants. And even it's so funny to even try to get a picture of a cacao tree. Sometimes it just looks like this mess of green, different size plants and all of that. Especially when a cacao tree is young, it requires a lot of shade, which means that there has to be totally different types of trees growing way above the baby cacao trees to create a canopy. So there's that shade.
Wow, beautiful. I was just thinking about how much I want to live in one of those forests.
It's just hot and humid. That's the only thing. So especially for those of us who grew up in more temperate climates, it can be challenging, depending on the person's, preferences. For me, I feel very uncomfortable in that hot and humid environment, but I'm also really grateful that I got to experience, just sitting in the cacao trees and actually, like, I would actually spend time. I spent some time just meditating there with the cacao trees and connecting with the forest that way. It was really amazing.
Was that a dieta?
No, it was just, I was just visiting a cacao farm, and I wanted to just really feel the energy of the forest and feel it that way, because I had drank cacao so much and eaten it. And I wanted to, I just wanted to kind of experience all stages of the cacao life cycle, you could say.
Beautiful. That sounds like an incredible, enlightening experience and valuable experience that enriches further your understanding of this special plant medicine.
Yeah.
Have there been, we're going to take a little bit of a diversion here. books, an impactful book that has maybe stood out as on your journey in the spiritual realm, a certain book that was just like, wow, this is it. This is a game changer. Does anything come to mind?
Definitely not about cacao. I mean, I've found some books about chocolate, but I've been creating a guidebook myself over the past few years. I just keep adding to it as I learn more and more. So on my website, there is that Soul Lift Cacao guidebook PDF that is available, and that's a great resource of information about like how to introduce people to cacao and important things to think about with safety and health precautions, and even talking about like ethics and this question about cultural appropriation, because that's something that comes up at times as the whole idea about ceremonial cacao spreads more and more, especially some people who have heritage in the nations of Central America where cacao grows more natively. There has been some concern about people working with cacao who don't have that heritage. So after, going really, really deep into this, and I know this is a little bit different than your question, but I've just come to the conclusion that because cacao is producing positive benefits at every stage, like I was talking about, as long as we're being ethical and responsible about how we're sourcing cacao and respectful with how we're presenting cacao, being really clear about not replicating actual indigenous practices, then ultimately we're just, it's like with yoga, the world is a profoundly better place with yoga being so much more expanded, and we just have to do our best to be respectful and ethical with how we're working about it. But getting back to your question, it's funny because I was reading a lot more about like depth psychology and consciousness about 10 years ago when I first started my whole like spiritual awakening. And I can't really say that a lot of those books actually helped me because sometimes they would just be so far out or so abstract that I would get into these like creative thought loops about the universe, almost like a Philip K. Dick kind of reality where, it's like I felt like I was in the Matrix for a while. And ultimately, I just, partly through working with plant medicines, that's what promoted me coming back into my body and back to the earth, really. And so now my whole spiritual practice is really based on those things: connection with my body and connection with the earth in some ways. I mean, I know that people can go much deeper in that idea, like with paganism and earth-based spirituality. But for me, it's really important to make sure that I am connected to this shared reality that we are all living in. So I can have experiences, internal meditative experiences or more spiritual experiences. But yeah, I guess so to answer your question, I mean, the one book that's sticking out of my mind is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, actually.
Such a good one.
Yeah. So that one spoke to me. I think I actually read that book when I visited a cacao farm in Costa Rica. I'm pretty sure they had that book there. I'm pretty sure that's when I read that. But it spoke to me. It spoke to this understanding of spiritual practice that I had already started to develop through walking the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage in Spain in late 2015, which cacao was a part of too. That was when I was really making some advancement in the recovery from chronic fatigue syndrome. And so, yeah, walking the Camino, which Paulo Coelho actually did at one point too. He wrote a book about that as well. But throughout his stories and throughout my experience, I started to think of this journey, like life as a journey and being guided by something in our core. My company, my LLC, is actually called Inner Waymark because I developed this idea of spirituality and as being guided by something inside of us. And, because in my past life, being that website manager, I used to develop some abstract goal and do everything I could to get there. And even if I did get there, I would sometimes be miserable or feel like I was off the mark, when instead, if I could make a practice out of tuning into my core and feel the directional pull of something deep inside of me, then it becomes more of a question of just taking one step at a time, tuned into that, and constantly readjusting, constantly, checking that I am still tuned into that. And the longer I've done that, the more I feel like I just continue tapping into fulfillment and purpose. And then I just get to places in my life where I look around and I'm like, wow, how did I even get here? Yeah, it's like life keeps getting more magical. It's always, there are always challenges, but it's really, it's that more practical understanding of spirituality that has helped me the most.
Wonderful. Love to hear that. Music to my ears on so many different fronts. Where can people find you?
Yeah, soulliftcacao.com is my website. There's an email newsletter that they can sign up for there. And I have Facebook and Instagram pages too for Soul Lift Cacao. There's a Soul Lift Cacao lovers group on Facebook. That's just a place where people can interact with others. And then with my courses, there are private Facebook groups that come with those too. Like with this 10-week course coming up, there's a private group where people can interact and support one another and share ideas. So those are the main ways.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nick, for sharing your wisdom, sharing your time, doing this incredible work for our human family. Again, I'm wowed and proud of your work, and this has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned so much. You have so much wisdom to share, and I love your grounded perspective is so needed for the times that we're in right now. And things like we talked about earlier, things are only going to get nuttier. And, having our feet on the earth and rooted in purpose, rooted in service to others is such a beautiful model for others to follow. And please know that, you've had a really positive impact on my journey. And I'm looking forward to sharing the Soul Lift Gospel of Cacao on my website, where people can find out more about how to get in touch with your products and to purchase your products. And thank you for the generous 20% off coupon code that will be in the show notes as well. And any parting wisdom that you would like to share with anybody that might be on the fence, that might be thinking, oh, plant medicines, like what the heck are these guys talking about?
Well, for cacao, at the very least, it's the original form of chocolate. So that's really, for anyone who's feeling nervous about it, that's a great way to think about it. It's just it's chocolate before it gets processed and diluted and turned into a piece of junk food, basically. Because and we haven't even talked about this, but most of what people will find at a grocery store, not only has it been sourced through the situation I talked about in West Africa, but it's just processed and diluted to a point that most of the superfood benefits and any kind of like medicinal or spiritual benefits are practically not there anymore. Like I won't name any brands, but then even looking for like fair trade cacao, usually it's not going to be clear where it came from or how hot it was roasted, that kind of thing. So Soul Lift Cacao is direct trade, an ethical direct trade. So I actually have direct relationships with the groups that I source from. And whereas with the common chocolate bar, the cacao in that has gone through at least 10 hands in its journey of production, with my groups, it's less than 5, basically, between the farmer and the customer. It's an exciting time, and there's very little, it's totally legal. That's another thing I haven't talked about. And it is the original form of chocolate. So there's really, somebody can give it a try, and then if they don't like it, then there's no chance of addiction, not really any like side effects or much to worry about.
Very low risk profile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for your time, Nick, and so great to have you. And
thanks for having me.
All the best till next time.
Take care.
Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Nick from Soul Lift Cacao. Really excited to share my favorite cacao recipe, which is I brew a cup of peppermint tea, and then I'll cut off a tablespoon or two of this raw organic cacao that Nick generously sources from small farms, direct trade style. Put that in in the cup and a little dash of vanilla. You need a spoon to stir that bad boy up, and then you are off to the races. So that's typically how I have it. Sometimes I'll just have it with hot water, and that dash of vanilla I think makes a big difference. It gives it almost tastes like a cookie when you're drinking it. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. If this episode resonated, please consider leaving a review at ratethispodcast.com/worththefight. And it'll show you how to make that review. And these reviews help us garner favor with the search algorithms, with the iTunes and Apple search algorithms, and help us get these conversations and get this message of hope and healing out to our human family. So thanks so much for the support. Again, I got a queue of inspired guests that are on deck, and I can't wait to share with y'all. Much love. Peace.
This has been Matt Simpson of the Worth the Fight podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can learn more about our mission of hope and healing at worththefightbook.org. Please rate, review, and share this episode. Please help us expand our circle of influence and get these vital conversations out to our human family. Also, if you are in a financial position to support the show, you can help us push forward these conversations with monthly donations on Patreon. This podcast is a tremendous amount of work for me, and I have stellar guests in the queue. Please help if you can. Thank you for listening to this programming. Much love, y'all. Peace.